So good evening, everybody. We want to welcome you to the overview to beginning African-American genealogy. We're very, very grateful that our presenter tonight, LaJoy Mosby, has stepped in as at the last minute as we had, due to unforeseen circumstances, Alice could not be here tonight. So she has been scrambling all day getting ready for this since this morning, and we're very, very grateful. She is the current president of the Central Maryland chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. She's been researching her ancestors from Alabama and Kentucky since the 1970s, and we're so very glad to have her here today to share all she knows with you. On behalf of the Howard County Library System, welcome everybody here tonight. I'm going to turn it over to LaJoy, and we're going to get started.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I'll start to share my screen. I'll ask that question that everyone asks. Can you see my screen? All righty.
Yes, good.
All right, so let's get started. Well, thank you for inviting me today. It is Black History Month, and the theme this year focuses on the Black family. So it's very fitting that we discuss African-American genealogy this evening. In the time that's allowed, I'm going to provide you with an overview of African-American genealogy and some insight regarding information on federal census records and other resources for family research. Embarking on a genealogy journey is not for the faint of heart, but it can be one of the most rewarding and insightful experiences you will ever undergo during your lifetime. The key to a fruitful experience is understanding the methods and strategies needed to do the research. As the saying goes, there is a method to this madness. So how do you get started? Well, you start with yourself. This is a critically important step to ensure that you're actually researching the correct people. Pull out your birth certificate and take a look at it. My birth certificate lists my father's occupation at the time of my birth. So now I know what he was doing at that time, along with the correct addresses and information. So check the spelling of your name and that of your parents. Is it correct? Does the hospital where you were born still exist? You know, there've been quite a lot of mergers and closings during the current time, during this time. Remember, no one can tell your story better than you. So begin to make notes about different times in your life. List your earliest memories. And if you're more comfortable speaking instead of writing, create a video on your smartphone to tell your own story. Now, once you've done that, begin to work your way back. Start with your parents, your grandparents, great-grandparents, and 2 times great-parents if you know who they are. Note everything you know about these persons. List their birth dates, marriage dates, and death dates if they've passed on, if you have all of that information. If you don't, that's fine. Just note that you don't have it. And don't skip a generation. Make sure that you have the names as you know them for each generation. Now, once you have that written down, you want to start to gather information. What do you already have right in your own home or within your reach in terms of family? Do you have funeral programs, newspaper clippings, family reunion documents, or photos of relatives? Reach out to the relatives who may already be researching your family members to see what they have. Ask them to take photos or to scan the information with a smartphone or a scanner and send the information to you via email or text. The more information you have, the easier it'll be to have a full understanding of your relatives and their lives. Oral history. Well, let's talk about oral history. Well, oral history is a very important component of African-American family research. You really want to interview all of your living relatives. You want to start with the elders, but don't overlook anyone who may have known people who are now deceased. Now, we all have smartphones now, so it's easy to record phone calls or even to have a safe in-person interview. While we often have a lot of questions, it's important to ensure that the interview is conversational. You want it to be relaxed. So talk in a relaxed manner, ask open-ended questions, allow the person to talk. And if they begin to tell additional stories, just listen and take notes when appropriate. Now, don't badger your relatives. If there's an event or a situation they don't choose to discuss, then move on to something else. You might be able to get that information from another relatives. We all have stories that have been passed down for generations. However, the key part of oral history is to be able to validate or prove that the information is true. Now, once you have gathered the information and conducted interviews, take time to review the information and organize it by each generation. You can use notebooks or journals. You can create hanging file folders if you prefer paper, or you can set up electronic files. If you set up electronic files, just be sure you back your information up to the cloud or to an external drive, and then make sure at least 2 other family members have copies or access to the information. You don't want to do all that work and then have the information just go up in smoke, as we say. Make sure to review all the information you have with a critical eye and be serious about noting how accurate something appears to be. We all know that sometimes people will embellish stories and sometimes people will leave information out. Now that you have all this information, you may want to create a visual family tree. This is an ancestral chart called a pedigree chart. This is your direct family line beginning with yourself. So you would push yourself here, your parents here. This could be your father's line, this could be your mother's line, and you could continue on as many people as you have with as many charts as you have. And I put a link in the handout in order to get charts like this. Now that you've collected the information, you reviewed it, and you created a family tree, what is it that you want to know? This is called, we refer to this as formulating a research question. So you got all this information. What is it that you really want to know as you begin your genealogy journey? Is it that you want to know more about a generation? Is it that you want to know the names of a particular generation? And so you need to write out the question, because just doing research all willy-nilly is not going to be useful to you. You want to be very clear about what you want to find, because that will address the record sets that you want to take a look at. Oops, sorry, went the wrong way, going the wrong way. Here we go. So once you have that question, you want to begin to find records. You want to identify the records that you can use to answer the question. Now, there are several records that can provide you with clues that might even answer your question. So before you start researching all these questions, searching for all these records, you're going to create something called a research log, which I'll show you in a minute. But here, look at all the different records that you can utilize that can provide answers to all the questions you have about your family. This is a research log. Now, this log was actually created for what we call on-site research. So you go when you actually go somewhere and you would physically look at a document. But honestly, you can utilize this for online records now, since we're in the midst of a pandemic. You write down the ancestor's name, what's the question, where they were located, and just what information and some comments on that information that you're looking for. Once you've done that, you want to locate the records. Okay, records are located literally all over the country. There are various repositories and many records are online, but you're going to be advised While there are many documents online, there are millions of documents that are not online. So there are additional documents you can only obtain by actually going to a repository like a local courthouse or a historical society, or sometimes you can request them by mail, such as birth certificates, death certificates. You can get that from the state. So here are some ideas of places you can see all types of records. FamilySearch.org, which is free. Ancestry, which you have free access through the library website at this time. So I assume that all of you have a Howard County library card or something similar, and so all of the libraries all over the country are providing Ancestry from home for the time being during this pandemic. So you can search those records for free instead of paying that $200 a year. Now is the time to do that. The 1940 census is online at the National Archives. If you're looking for military records, it's FO3, which is owned by Ancestry. And you might be able to look at a few things there as a trial run, but it's about $49 a year. Findagrave.com is free, but it's cemetery records and they photographed headstones and etc. And if you know the cemetery of your family, you may be able to see information there. Newspapers are available at the Library of Congress. They have historical newspapers. More contemporary newspapers are, as well as some historical newspapers, are at newspapers.com. So also we have in-person records where you can go to state and local archives, county courthouses, state and county historical societies, as well as cemeteries. Okay. Now let's start with vital records. Vital records basically provide key information on a person's life. One's birth, marriage, and death records. They're usually kept at the state or local government level. And also, we can take a look at church records. Church records can be useful if they list baptismal information, which would list the parents' names, along with information on deaths. Now, not all denominations kept records, but the Catholic Church has significant records. So if your family is Catholic, you might have a wonderful opportunity to find records there. But don't overlook small churches and other denominations. And sometimes in rural churches, they have information as well. So let's take a look at a death certificate. A death certificate is a genealogist's dream for the most part. A death certificate is an example of a vital record, and here's what you can learn from it. The full name of the person. You can learn their date of death. You can learn their date of birth. If you're lucky, you can learn their parents' names and where their parents were born. But you have to always be mindful of the informant. Who is the person that gave this information? Would they actually know this information? In this case, this is my paternal great-grandmother, and the informant is my grandmother. The information on this death certificate matches what she told me. And my great-grandmother also had a sister, and her death certificate lists the same parents. So I'm going to go with the fact that this is probably correct. I do know this is the address where she lived because I spent many a summer there. So these are the things that you can learn from a death certificate. You also can tell where the person was buried. So I know she was buried here. Here's the name of the funeral director and where that was and when all of that occurred. Death certificates can be a wonderful, wonderful source of information, especially if you're looking for a previous generation. So now, not only do I have information on my great-grandmother, I have her maiden name. I also have her parents' name. I've also gone back a generation. I know that she was born in the 1880s, so I can look for her, should be able to look for her with her parents in the 1900 census. I can almost estimate that her parents might have been born about 20 years before. So they may have been born at the after slavery or perhaps right at the end of slavery. So I can look for them in the 1880 census or the 1870 census. All of that information can be gleaned from a death certificate. So in addition to vital records, family researchers can obtain a lot of information by utilizing the federal census. So let's talk about the federal census. Well, first of all, it was not created for genealogy purposes, but it is the main record that many family researchers start with to provide insight into their families. So let's talk a little history about the federal census. One of the things we have to be mindful about the census is that you have to be mindful of census dates. There are spelling errors and other mistakes because you got humans involved. You know, some families may have been missed by census takers, and the racial categories change over time. So the federal census is in the Constitution of the United States, and they indicated that the first one would occur in 1790 and every 10 years after that time. The census was to determine congressional representation and taxation. The other persons, you hear, all of this 3/5 of all other persons, would be all enslaved persons. Now, this occurred because while there was enslaved persons in all 13 states, all of them, from at the time when the United States was from Georgia to New Hampshire, there were more in the Deep South than there were in New England, and therefore they wanted to make sure that the South did not have a congressional numerical advantage over other parts of the country. So this was essentially the United States in 1790, and this is where people lived. So imagine in 1790, these federal marshals were authorized to hire assistants, and they were to go out and collect information. Imagine these guys riding around the country on horseback with parchment and quills and ink, and the government paid them, but they didn't supply them with any supplies or any paper. They had to make up their own forms. But this is the area that was enumerated. So you see, none of this wasn't the United States. Neither was Florida. So we're talking from what is now Georgia along the coastline all the way up. These are the areas that were enumerated in 1790. So let's talk about this race definitions in the US Census records. Okay. A lot of times people will say, my family is one race in one record and another in another record. How is that possible? Well, this is how it's possible. Please note that the census taker determined the race of the person. We didn't get to self-identify race until 1960. So understand there's a significant amount of subjectiveness of the person that's actually recording the information. So here you see in the early days, it was primarily other free people. It didn't even state race, it just other free people. You were white or you were other free people, and then there were slaves. And then in the next couple of years, we began to get racial designations. The term mulatto, which meant two races, not necessarily black and white, it could be a mixture of two races, began to appear. And on the slave schedules, people were also notated whether they were black or mulatto. They would call you, what was your color, not your race, it was your color. And of course, the designation for Indians came in around 1860. So here you see in the next 20 years, we had an expansion of Asian racial indications. 1890 was a very special year for the census. It was a year in which they really wanted to know various percentages of Negro race. So you had the mulatto, you had a quadroon, which was somebody that was 1/4, and an octoroon, which was 1/8. So imagine someone coming to your home and trying to look at you and determine if you were octoroon or quadroon or mulatto, or if you were merely black. And the enumerators were given instruction to take great care to make sure that they designated people correctly with these particular designations. So that year they added the term Japanese to the Asian category. So you see in 1900, they dropped all designations except black. Anyone that had any, even the slightest inference of black was considered to be black or Negro. So you won't see any of these multiracial categories in 1900. Comes back in 1910 and 1920, mulatto only comes back. And you see we have additional Asian categories and what we would call South Asian, they called Hindu back in the day. So 1920 was the last year that they used the term mulatto. After that, if you were even slightly black, they called you Negro. And so you'll see somebody that was mulatto in the 1910 and 1920, and then there'll be Negro or Black in 1930 or 1940. So the 20th century census. The key to getting the most out of the census records is to start with the most recent available census, and that would be 1940. All right, census records are released to the public every 72 years, and the 1950 will be available on April the 1st, 2022. And the researchers are already excited about that, but we're going to focus on what's available to us today. The first thing you must do is to take off your 21st century lens and view these records via the times that they were created. You have to be mindful of what was happening in the country, as well as the city, the town, or the county where your relatives live. So let's start with the 1940 census. This is the most recent published census, and most of us probably know a family member that was recorded in this 1940 census. Could be a parent, a grandparent, great-grandparent, could be yourself. You may want to identify that person or persons and search for them in the census records. Please know that county boundaries sometimes changed over time. So if you don't find your family in the county you think they should be in, look at an adjacent one. It makes sense to locate a blank census form for each year so you can clearly see the questions and compare that blank form to the responses of your family. Now, the 1940 census occurred 1 year after the end of the Great Depression. So what information can we find in these records? Well, you could break this census into 5 sections. Okay, here's the household information. Did your family own or rent? What's the street number, house number? Here you have the family, or what I call the personal information. It's listed of everyone in the house. What was their relationship to this person that was the head of the household? It talked about their marital status, their color, race, were they male or female, their age at the last birthday. Here you get to talk about, it talks about their educational levels. Also indicates where they were born and whether or not they were citizens. This is a wonderful question. It's a location question. They ask, where did you live in 1935? So if they lived in the same house, it should say same house. If they lived in the same town, county, it should say same place. And if not, it should identify where they live. So if your family moved during this time, it would give you an idea. So now, if they did move, you'd know where they were in 1940, and you know where they were in 1935. Also, the government wanted to know about the employment status. Were you working? Were you working for one of the New Deal programs like WPA? So they wanted to understand also what was your income in 1939. This was such a controversial question that they kept it to the very end, so that if you got offended and like, I'm not telling you what I made in 1939, the census taker could leave your house knowing they had all the other information that they would need. Now let's take a look at what one looks like. See why you need that blank form? You never can tell about the handwriting of your enumerator. This is not the easiest to read. Also, there were these supplementary questions that weren't asked of everybody, but this is where we're asked about whether or not you were a veteran and if you were applying for Social Security. This is also, let's take a closer look. This is also the very first census where we actually know who provided the information. See this little circle right here with an X? This is the person that gave the information. In this case, this is my maternal great-grandmother. She gave the information. We can see that she owns a home, the value of it, the mortgage, she's mortgage-free. And so she's here, tells you about her education, the education of my mom and some of her siblings. My grandparents are here, my grandfather's occupation, and the amount of money he supposedly made, if he told the truth, to the enumerator during the course of that year. Now, I also want you to make note of one thing. You should make note of all the males in your family that are listed on the 1940 census that are age 16 and older. Why? World War II is coming. And the draft is going to begin first with the 21-year-old males. I think that's in 1941. And by 1942, it's expanded to 18-year-old males. So you'll want to search those World War II draft cards, which are online, for those relatives. There was also an old man's draft for ages 45 to 65, not for enlistment purposes, but to support stateside activities. Also check to see if your female relatives were in the WECs, the Women's Army Corps, or if they participated in civilian war efforts. So here's an example of how you can look at a census record, and from that census record, you can find information from another record. Also, if people were eligible, you should also look for them in Social Security records as well from this 1940 census. Also in 1940, they took a housing census. So this provided you with information on how people lived. Did they have running water? Were they using a well? Did they using coal, fuel? Did they have a refrigerator? Did they have electricity? So each household was asked these questions. They took this information back. They aggregated the data. They developed reports by county, by state, and in some cases by major city, and then they destroyed all the individual records. It's kind of heartbreaking because, I would love to know whether, my family had refrigeration or electricity in 1940. We know they owned a home, but were they still using coal or wood or gas? Because there are fireplaces in a lot of these old houses. So, but in any case, though, those reports are available, and the reports give you a snapshot into the housing of the community. It is broken down by race because we break everything down by race in the United States. So you can see the disparity in the quality of housing, as well as the level of ownership between the white community and communities of color in 1940. So let's move back a decade. This is 1930. Okay, this is the first census after the beginning of the Great Depression. So there was also an unemployment census because we've all seen those photographs of bread lines from that time. This was the very last census to ask the literacy question, can you write? Well, what was going on? I guess public education was a thing. So I guess the idea was that the majority of Americans were thought to be able to read and write after this particular period of time. This particular census also indicates the birthplace of the parents, because they were looking at a lot of information on immigration at that time. All right. It also talks about whether or not you were a veteran. So this would be people who were in World War I or anything before that time. And I also wanted to know how many weeks you were unemployed. Now, my favorite question is the radio ownership question. The radio was the technology of the day, and it provided a free form of entertainment. And by 1930s, many middle-class families owned a home radio. It's more like a piece of furniture, and it required electricity. So if you had a radio, you had to have electricity back in the day. So you had these comedy programs. Those of us who are old enough may remember that before there was ever Amos and Andy on television, Amos and Andy was on the radio. And then you had soap operas and sporting events and music, Glenn Miller and all these baseball games. And you remember some of the presidents, FDR he used to do radio shows as well. So here's a 1930 census. This is my father's side of the family. I love it. They owned a radio, woohoo, along with owning their home in Kentucky. And so you can see where my great-grandmother was working at the time and her occupation, along with my grandmother, my dad, and his twin brother. And you can see the other people that lived on the block at that time. This is a 1920 census, but what you're looking at is a record, the type of record you would see in Ancestry or perhaps FamilySearch.org. The thing about a record is that it's a transcription that somebody has taken time to look at the image, and they have determined what was on that image, and they typed it up into this nice little transcription. All righty, well, that sounds good, doesn't it? But you never want to just look at this. Even though it's a lot easier to read than the handwritten images, it could be incorrect because a human transcribed it. That's why you will never want to take for granted the information that you find on a record. You must always look at the original image. So here you notice the father's birthplace and the mother's birthplace are not listed. Well, let's take a look at the image. You go down here, you move over here, and you notice those two areas are actually on the image, along with everything else here. So you can't take it for granted. All right. Also, you notice, as I had indicated, that, mulatto, this was 1920. This was the last time the term mulatto was utilized. And so you see some of my family members are listed as mulatto here. Let's go back to 1910. Same family. All right, once again, you see the mulatto, okay? But one thing that you would find on the 1910 census is the number of children born and the number living. This is living births only, no stillborns, no miscarriages. So this would imply that my 2 times great grandmother had 5 children and there were 4 living. I know this to be incorrect, but that's okay. It also talks about the number of years the person they were married. You will find on these census records M, and it'll say M1, M2. M means the number of marriages. You need to take this with a great grain of salt. For example, if you have a husband that is like 15 years older than the wife or 20 years older than the wife, it might be her first marriage, but it might be his second marriage. In one of my family records, I have a 2 times great uncle who was noted as being married once. The man was married twice. The wife was a big age gap between him and the wife. So he not only was he married before, he was married and children, and you can find him in the census, an earlier census with the other wife. So there's some little things you just want to take notice of. Maybe, and a lot of women did marry older men at that time, but you just want to check to see, because sometimes children might be one person's children, but not the other person's children. This is also the sign of what I call a lazy enumerator. This is Mr. Clarence Smith, and Clarence Smith decided that everybody was born in Alabama. All the parents, the children, which is not true, but that's okay. You'll see this a lot as well. Always read the census all the way over to the right, because you want to know what people were doing, the level of education, whether they were renting or owning. You want to make sure that you have captured all of the information so you know clearly everything about your family. Also, I think that this was the census where we were looking at whether a person was a survivor of the Civil War. It didn't matter whether they were Union or Confederate. And they really did want to know if people were deaf or dumb in these censuses, especially here in the 1900 census as well. So once again, you see the number of children born and the number of children living. You'll see the whether they were married. This is an interesting census because it lists the month of birth and the year. Now, the Census Bureau figured that people might not know their birthday, but they would know their birth month. And I guess that's interesting, but some of these people were enslaved. So I don't even know if they actually knew their birth month. They may have known they were born in the fall or known they have been born in the winter, but one can see. I look at my great grandmother here. It looks like it says that she was born in June. We never celebrated her birthday in June. It was always the end of May. So all of the information must be taken with a grain of salt. Also, you have the names, the places where both parents were actually born, as well as the occupation of people. So let's move back. We're going a whole century. The 1890 census, the one that got away. This is the census that every researcher wished was still around. So what happened to the 1890 census? Well, there was a fire down at the Census Bureau in 1921. Records got burned and wet, and they just ended up destroying them. There was this outcry of like, no, but the Census Bureau was like, okay, no, they're not going, we didn't have scanning at that time in the way we do now. There's a lot of things that just weren't in place. So they just got rid of most of them. There are a few fragments left. If your family's from Perry County, Alabama, or if you're DC, Georgia, Illinois, South Dakota, Texas, there's pieces of them, not even the whole state, just pieces. And so here's an example I pulled from the Washington, DC, 1890. So this is the Bush family. Don't know these people. They could be your family. If so, wonderful for you. They lived on 14th Street, 1722 14th Street. I would imagine I'm going to say that might be Northwest. It doesn't say. So this is Rose Bush. She's the head of the family. She's a mulatto. It talks about her age. She's married, although there's no husband present. It talks about, how many children. She had 11. There are 10 living, and where her parents were born. I thought it was interesting. Her father was born in Rhode Island. She's a tailor. She's able to read and write. And of course, she speaks English. So some of her children were working with her. Some of them weren't. Some of them were younger. I assume after writing mulatto for several of them, the enumerator decided that they didn't have to write it for everybody else. But this particular census enumerated one family on basically the entire sheet of paper. Oh my gosh, to have that, you have a good sense of your family, but they're destroyed. So we don't have the luxury. And this was the census that had all of the different racial designations for African Americans. So 1880, let's go over there real quickly. Oh, I do want to say in 1890, there was a veterans schedule. If you had family members that served in the Civil War, maybe, or either it would have been the Mexican War, they had veterans listed, and even there are only fragments of that. There are only pieces of that left as well. 1880 census is the first census to indicate relationships. So once again, this is my mother's side of the family. So you see here my 2 times great grandfather. And now we know for sure, supposedly, we don't know who gave the information. Anything before 1940, we actually don't know who provided the information. But I know, because I knew some of these people, that these are his children, and this is his wife. But you'll also note where their parents were born and where they were born. But look where they are. They're in Alabama. This would indicate my family origins are in Virginia, North Carolina, because clearly they're in Alabama. Their parents were not born in Alabama. So either they and their parents came to Alabama later. So my 2 times great grandmother says she was born in Virginia. That's what our family history says. This implies that she was born around 1840. Well, if that's the case, then she didn't get to Alabama until after 1840. That might give you also some clues about looking for the people that may have brought her there. So the 1870 census, this is the first census that names the formerly enslaved by name, but family relationships are not noted in this census. So this is my father's family, and this is in Kentucky in 1870. And so this is our family name. We've been Mosby since the beginning. There was no changes that I could see. My family could not read or write. If you look on this page, you'll know that there are very few Black people here. There's a few down here, the Bufords, but everybody else is not. There was a time when we were doing African-American genealogy that we used to say that you wanted to look for the closest white family that had significant real estate of money, because that would probably be a potential slave owner. Well, it took me a while, but neither this man or my family slave owner. It's this guy down here. He was the person that owned him till emancipation. But this gentleman right here is this gentleman's wife. This is her father. And this young man right here, I believe, is a son-in-law. So all of these people are related, and my family lived in the midst of them, even after emancipation, by the way. So now we're backing up to the slavery era. This is where, as African Americans, we come to a fork in the road, and we have to explore both paths. So you have slave schedules for 1850 and 1860. Now, slave schedules only list the slave owner's name and the slaves by gender, age, and color. So here you have, let me see, this is my family slave owner right here. And we know these are the people that he owns and their ages. This column would say if you had any runaways, you would note them here. If you freed anybody, you would note them in this column. And if they were deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic, you would list them and you would have a tick mark in this column. So these are the people that were living in this area in Kentucky in 1850. This is the 1860 slave schedule. What's the difference? Well, in 1860, they added a column that said the number of slave houses. And enumerators were not necessarily always good about noting that. This little tick mark just might indicate that they have a house. But here you would note that you will see in some cases they would say they have 2 slave houses. It can give you an indication of how people lived, whether they lived, you have a lot of slave houses, only a few, and you have a lot of people in that house. It could be a very large slave house. It could be probably 2 stories if there were a lot of people in there. But the level of privacy etc. in these houses was mute. So this is the other side of the road. Free people of color. It's been said that about 1 in 8 of us has a line, a family line that backs up to perhaps a free person of color. So how do you know if you have a free person of color in your family? Well, you search the 1860 census. And if the person is in the 1870 census and they're in the 1860 census, then they were free. When did they get free? Now that's what you'll have to investigate. If they're in 1860 or early census, is there an indication of free people of color? So here you go. There's a study that was done at University of Virginia that actually took a look at the census records to see how many free people of color were in the United States, noted at each census from 1790 to 1860. And you'll note that a lot of them were in the South, right? So there's always been free people in the United States. Even before the 1790, there were free people of color in the United States. This is primarily, some people say, well, honestly and truly, when you see free people of color or free persons of color or other, you're basically talking about free African Americans. There may be a few Native Americans in there that were living in the general population, and you may have a few Asians, but for the most part, you're really talking about Black people. So one of the things that was a regular occurrence if you were a free person of color is that you had to, they had to know you were free. Because you were walking around, either you had to have your free papers on you or you had some kind of little badge or something that indicated that you were a free person. So there was something at the county level called a Negro Register. They were kept by the county clerk, and people were required to register if you were a free person of color. So let me show you one. This one says it's a minute of the free papers of a free person of color in April 1848. Now, sometimes when you go to a local courthouse or a historical society, they will say they don't have any Negro registers. But we beg to differ. You may not know it by that name. So you notice it says a minute. So it might be a minute book. Sometimes they refer to them as minute books. So you might want to look at a minute book during a particular time period. Look in the back, look through it. It won't be indexed, probably. You're going to have to take some time to take a look at it. But look at this one, Arthur Locklear. Spelling was not standard in America before a certain period of time. 48 years old, 5'10", dark complexion. And here you have the people that are attesting to that this person is a free person. This is Lucy. I imagine it could be his wife, 45 years of age, dark complexion, signed by these people right here. So you have the Taylors here. It just might be a family. You have a child, you have a young adult, you have people here. And all of these people were free people of color during this time, and they had to register every so often to indicate that they were still free. Also, here's an example of an 1860 census. So this is Moses Weaver. Moses is in Kentucky. He's a farmer. His value of his land, this is his personal property. He cannot read or write, is noted here. Take a look at his neighbor, Josiah Felix, who also actually owns another line of my people. And so look how much property Josiah has, Mr. Felix has. So of that $28,500 worth of personal, of the personal estate, that includes the slaves. And he had a fair amount of slaves. When I say a fair amount, I think less than 50, but still a good number of slaves. He was a manufacturer. He had like a sawmill or something. So some of this was also his factory. Here's the 1850 census. So we know Moses was free in 1850. So, and this shows that he was born in Virginia and his wife was born in Kentucky. And they were in Woodford County, which Woodford County was formed in 1792. So we recognize that they had been free for a while. Once again, the census changed let me say this, in 1850, the census we just saw, it was the first census to list everybody in the household. Prior to that, you had just the head of households, like here in 1840, and you had the dreaded tick marks. The tick marks indicated the ages of the males and females in the household, and it can give you an idea of the ages of the people that lived in the household at the time, but you're not going to get any names. This is, all of these people here are free people of color. The Manleys, the Smiths, the Halls, the looks like the Nickens, all of this, the Weavers, all of this is in Hertford County, North Carolina in 1840. This is the second page of the 1840 census. We always tell people, don't skip the second page, because this is where the slaves were. In this particular community, there were very few enslaved people for this particular district. And you see there were people there that were blind or deaf or dumb, were all noted. This is an actual 1790 census from that same community. This also lists free people of color that were free in 1790. You see all other free persons. They don't indicate whether, they're not looking at race. They say all other free persons. You assume that they are people of, well, they're people of color, because these indicate these are all white people here, white males, white females, and then you have slaves. So you look at all of these people here. Here are the Nickens again, the Shinnegots, all of these people that are free. And you see all of these free people of color and a number of people that are in their household. This was 1790. So that Nickens gentleman, I happened to notice that he had a Revolutionary War pension. So he served in the Revolutionary War. We always think about Washington crossing the Delaware, but the Revolutionary War was fought in all of the 13 colonies, all the way as far as south as Georgia. So, you know, there were people who were Revolutionary War patriots. So Mr. Nickens actually was a patriot. And I always tell people, if this is your ancestor, you run, don't walk to DAR and SAR. So because you are entitled to become a member, because you have proof here that this is a patriot of color. So in addition to that, what we call the regular census, there were Indian census rolls, and they began essentially in 1880. Primarily, these were American Indians living on reservations. They started with the West, and there's not a census for every reservation or group of American Indians for every year. And primarily, these are people who were in what we call federally recognized tribes. So if you had family members that were part of a tribe that is only state recognized, they probably should not be in this census, just so you know. So we also have these non-population schedules. So what will this do for you? The agricultural schedules, if your family was farming and they own land, it'll on the schedule, you could go, if they're in the 1880 census, say for example, at the very end, it'll have a number that corresponds to the agricultural schedule. So you can go there, you can see how many horses and pigs they had, how much land they had, how much of that land was improved, and how much cotton they grew the year before. It'll give you an idea of what if they were a successful farmer or not. The mortality schedules came about at a time before there were death certificates, and these might actually be the only record of death during that period of time for people. It recorded the deaths that occurred the year before the census. So you would have, leading up to the census. So you would have information here for people. They did record slaves. They would have the slave owner's name. They may have the slave's name, but they would certainly tell you what the person died from. You can see that people died from typhoid and consumption and tuberculosis and yellow fever, all of those things that were prevalent back in the day. Social statistics schedules give you an idea of the collective community. They don't particularly tell you anything about individuals, but they'll tell you how many churches are in the community, how many libraries, how many teachers, and even the number of people that the church can seat, and just anything you want to know about your community, you should be able to find in the social statistics. It'll give you an idea of what was going on in the lives of your family at that time. The defective, dependents, and delinquent schedule. Oh my. So this was only done in 1880. And it was enumeration of those persons that were in prisons, poorhouses, or in insane asylums. Also, they enumerated people who were mentally ill, deaf, dumb, and blind, and then they were living at home. So if the person was incarcerated, it gives you the name, the offense, the fine, and the length of times. So this particular one does give you evidence for facts not found in other documents or might be available due to state privacy laws. The manufacturing schedule was the government really wanted to know about the type of manufacturing that was going on in the United States at the time. And the business schedule in 1935, the government was really trying to get a feel for the type of businesses, because that's the middle of a depression. They were trying to get a feel for what businesses were there, who was hiring, who wasn't hiring. It gives you a real snapshot of what was going on in terms of the business community in the United States during the Great Depression. So what did we learn today? We learned, I hope, quite a bit. So the census, we consider it a genealogy gold mine, and it does provide you with information on your family, and it kind of gives you insight into the lives of your family. Think about it, people who lived through the founding of the country, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, and the Great Depression. 1950, next year will tell us more about those people who lived through World War II. And so these early census records may provide clues to family structure, the military service, and whether your family was free or enslaved. And those slave schedules can provide a clue, only a clue, to perhaps the location of enslaved ancestors once you've done your due diligence and done as much research as you can on your family. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about OGS as I wrap up here. OGS is the Afro-American Historical and Genealogy Society. It was created in 1977 in Washington, D.C. We have nearly 40 chapters all over the United States, and we invite you to go take a look at our national website and our chapter website. We've been here in the Howard County and the Columbia area since around 1988. We currently meet via Zoom bi-monthly from September to May. Our next meeting is March the 13th at 1 o'clock. If you'd like more information on that meeting, go to our website, and then you'll send us an email because we want to provide you with the Zoom link if you're interested. We do a summer program for our financial members. The total dues, I'll tell you, for local and national dues is a total of $55 for individuals, and it is $60 for families, which would be 2 people. It allows you to have 2 people. So here's our chapter email, and you can also find us on Facebook. And I know our time is almost up, so for that, I'll say thank you. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Right, we want to thank you, LaJoy, for sharing that wealth of information. If you have any questions now for LaJoy about the presentation, about the Central Maryland chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, or any questions about doing your ancestry research, you can type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. We've also, LaJoy's also been kind enough to provide a handout that I will provide the link for in the chat that is attached to the event on the library's event calendar. And so please, here we have a question now, LaJoy. Is the 1840 census the only 2-page census?
No, the 1830 census would be 1840, I think, all the way to probably definitely 1820, 1810 would probably be 2 pages. So if you have free family of color, you would also want to look for them 1830, 1820, and all the way back to 1790. But the 2 pages was definitely 1830s is definitely 2 pages. Mm-hmm. So okay, why does it take so long for the census to be released? They want to make sure people are dead. It's a privacy factor. The average life expectancy at the time was 72. And I have been told, although I haven't tried it, that if you're looking for your own census, you can request it if it's not published, but I hear it's very expensive. I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't know how you would go about doing it because I haven't tried it. But we've been told in some of the institutes that I've been in that you could probably get your own information. The key is I don't know if you would be able to get, let's say, a deceased grandparent or great grandparents' information because of privacy and the way the laws are written.
LaJoy, can you give us any sense of the difference between family search versus ancestry? Do you have a preference?
You know, it's interesting. It's the way they're set up. And basically, first of all, family search is free. Ancestry is behind a paywall, as we say. It costs. You'll find more county records on family search. They won't all be indexed in a searchable fashion like you'll find on Ancestry, but you can find wonderful county records. Like I found the deed to my great-grandparents' home on family search the other night. The actual handwritten deed transaction from 1903 of the house that I used to go spend my summers in Kentucky. I also found information on that early family member who was freed at emancipation. I found through the tax list that he owned a horse and he was taxed. And then in 1873, he acquired a lot of land. I don't think I've ever seen those records at the county level like that on Ancestry. Sure, they have some county level records. Ancestry to me is really good for state level records and federal records. And they do have county records on Ancestry. So I'm not going to tell you they don't. They do. But I find that when you get down to the granular level, family search is better. Family search has been around. They've been scanning records and creating microfiche since the 1930s. Family search does belong to the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is the Mormons. Do not let that assuage you at all. The information is wonderful, and you can find significant information there. Mm-hmm.
We also have a question, LaJoy, about do you use DNA and chromosome matching in your research?
I do. But this is the thing. DNA without genealogy to me is futile. I mean, you can make some discoveries using DNA, but the genealogy, you need the genealogy to back it up. For example, I have second cousins from my Kentucky lines that matched me on Ancestry, but I also happen to know his grandmother was my grandfather's younger sister. So I have that connection with him. Sometimes we have our chapter vice president, Melvin Collier, has written books on utilizing DNA to find family members. He's connected his North Carolina and his Mississippi family and has written 2 books about that. Especially, he's developing another book, and maybe we get him to come speak to you about the utilization of DNA and family research. It can be an incredibly useful tool, but you really do need to have a good idea about your genealogy. I will tell anybody, if your family is in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, they didn't start there. You need to look for them. Your roots are in Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, and maybe Georgia. The cotton gin changed everything. People were on the East Coast. The cotton gin got invented. People got greedy. They needed land. They went west. And so in some cases, farther west as they went to Texas, because you don't see people growing cotton on the East Coast. It's further west. And in Kentucky and Tennessee, Kentucky is not a cotton state, it's tobacco, hemp. So you need to kind of know what's where. And so but I can assure you, if your people are anywhere west, what I call west of the Mississippi, or even a little bit more, that they didn't start there. They started on the East Coast. So either walked on the federal, what they call the old federal road, or somebody put them on a ship and they came around past Florida and they docked them either at Pensacola, Mobile, or New Orleans, and they walked them inland. Other questions?
We also have a question about what countries listed on places like Ancestry DNA are more indicative of family history of slavery. Do you have an idea for that?
That's a good question. I just saw a presentation from the St. Louis County Library, which is on YouTube, by the way, where a gentleman actually kind of broke it down. He said that he actually said that when you look at, say, South Carolina and Savannah area on the East Coast, because the planters were looking for people who knew how to grow rice, the slaves that were brought there were specifically probably from Angola, Sierra Leone, maybe even Senegal. They were specifically looking for people that had those skill sets because they didn't, because you don't grow rice in Europe or Barbados, where a lot of the Charleston planters came from Barbados and then they came to Charleston. So, but if your family is in the areas like I was saying, Alabama, et cetera, they didn't particularly care where they got them from, so that you can say they came from the Gambia, perhaps Sierra Leone, Western Africa, maybe even Ghana. And so that might give you an indication of where those people were brought, because you didn't need a special skill set because you didn't grow cotton in Africa. So they just needed people that could do the work, or your tobacco wasn't grown in Africa. So if that would be where the people from Virginia or Maryland or North Carolina would get their slaves from. I thought it was very interesting. I had not quite heard that before, but they said if you look at your DNA and you look where your people are, and your DNA points to these particular countries, you can almost get an idea of what, at least what countries your family came from, which I thought was interesting. I had not heard that before, but that was an interesting supposition.
Are you willing to make your PowerPoint presentation available for people who are interested?
I think it would probably be better to have the recording available.
Okay.
I'd rather do that because, PowerPoints get updated all the time. So it'd probably make more sense if you were interested to be able to view this recording instead. And I'm open to that. Okay.
Okay, great. Do we have any more questions? I know there was a hand raised a little while ago.
I see one. How is a child born outside of marriage recorded? Well, that's interesting. It just depends. I had a great uncle, I guess a great great uncle, who between marriages had a child with a woman. The child was enumerated with their mother. So you wouldn't necessarily know who the father was because they weren't living together. It was the death certificate that allowed us to know who the child's father was. I guess it just depends. If the child is brought into the home of the husband and wife, it would be, it's interesting. I don't know that I saw a lot of that from the 1800s or the early 1900s. And usually in those cases, you might not know. The child might have a different surname than the mother. That's one way you might look at it. Or you may not be aware unless you're looking at a death certificate. One of the things I've done on Ancestry, I've done a search where I just put in the parent name and I look for it in death records, or I might just put the parent's name in to see what comes up. And don't put anything else but the name of the parent to see if that name comes up on a death certificate. It worked for me at least one time. So I'm considering doing it for a lot of different ones to see if I can locate some of the children of some of my collateral relatives. And by collateral relatives, I mean the siblings of some of my 2 times great grandparents, because we're trying to figure out who the next generation back is. And we're trying to see if there's any indication on these death certificates, which I'm having a hard time locating. Did I answer your question with any level of satisfaction? It's very hard to locate outside children. They might be in the same community. You can search for just the surname in a certain time frame and see what comes up. I know that I researched everybody with the surname Mosby in 1870, and that actually led me to be able to find the slave owners, and not just the last one, but 2 or 3 before that. And so you sometimes have to look and see who the family members are. And they may not live next door. They may live down the road or at another farm along the way. You just have to do a bit more detective work.
Do we have any more questions tonight? We have a comment that sometimes the children are living with grandparents or other family members as well.
That could be. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, one thing before I go, I do want to let everybody know, if you're not aware, started today, that for the next today, 3 days, 25th to the 28th, is something called Roots Tech. And so it's Roots Tech, one word, .org. It is also sponsored by Family Search. It is the largest genealogy conference in the entire world, and it is virtual and it is free. You do have to have a Family Search account to log on, but I would go to Family Search, go ahead and it's a free account, create your free account first, then go to Roots Tech, ROOTS Tech, one word, write it like it's one word, .org, and then go into Roots Tech. You'll have all these wonderful sessions for people who are lots of information, just lots of information, even more than I could give you tonight. And not only that, you create a playlist, you'll be able to view that playlist, I understand, for several months. So if you don't get to every session, a work session that you want to view, you'll have, say, 6 to 8 months to take a look at it. And there's great information in there. There's several African-American focused sessions, as well as just general sessions that you should take a look at anything that speaks to the census, anything that talks about Reconstruction records during the Reconstruction period, anything that speaks to military records. You want to be able to cover the gambit. I also invite you to go to our chapter website and click on the research tab, as well as the genealogy tips tab. We have books and blogs and podcasts and links to all of those things so that you can learn as much about genealogy as possible. It's wonderful to look for your family. It's better to know how to look for your family, so that when you do it, you'll know exactly where to go, where each record will lead you, and how, oh, this record should lead me here, or that record should lead me there. I'll take a look here. But you'll know that if you read or listen to the podcast or view the webinars on a regular basis. You must be in a constant learning mode as well as researching mode in an effort to make to get to the family stories that you want to get to. We all want to, we always say in our chapter that everyone is looking for their own Kunta Kinte. And in order to get there, you're going to have to continue to do your research, but you need to learn along the way. You've got to learn along the way, or not, you'll find yourself consistently being frustrated. Or you might be researching the wrong people. How frustrating is that? So I encourage you to continue to learn and to continue to research and just enjoy yourself along the way. Thank you.
I want to thank you, LaJoy, for doing this tonight on short notice. What a chock full presentation you have. I'm putting your contact information into the chat now so that you can contact LaJoy if you have any questions for her or about the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. You can please contact her. I'll put the Gmail address in the chat. I've also put the other links in there as well. We'll stick around for just a few more minutes, but on behalf of the Howard County Library System, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and listening to this presentation. We will let you know when we do post it to YouTube. We also want to let you know to go and check out the handout that LaJoy has provided for us. That is in the link to the class tonight. I'm going to put that in the chat one more time. You click on it, it'll be on the right-hand side underneath the attachments. and you'll find that there. And just a big, big thank you to LaJoy for sharing this wealth of information with all of us here tonight. So thank you for coming out tonight. We'll stick around for just an extra few minutes if you have a last minute question, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you again. I'm going to turn off the recording.